Mick Jagger is known for many things: his voice, his moves on stage, and his honesty. He's never been the type to stay quiet when something doesn't sit right with him. But in 1969, when his bandmate Brian Jones died, Jagger did something no one expected. He skipped the funeral. Fans were stunned. Why would the frontman of the Rolling Stones not show up to say goodbye to the band's founder? Was there a falling out? Hidden tension? For years, the question has lingered. And the truth behind it all might just surprise you. From humble beginnings to the big stage, Michael Philip Jagger, better known to the world as Mick Jagger, was born on July 26, 1943, in Dartford, Kent. He didn't come from a showbiz family. In fact, it was a pretty normal middle-class upbringing. His dad, Joe Jagger, was a gym teacher who helped make basketball a thing in Britain, and his grandfather was a teacher too. His mom, Eva, originally from Sydney, worked as a hairdresser and was heavily involved in Conservative Party politics. So yes, discipline and ambition were kind of baked into his DNA. From an early age, Mick was already drawn to music. He wasn't just singing in the church choir. He was that kid always performing in front of the mirror, copying singers he heard on the BBC or Radio Luxembourg. Music wasn't just a hobby. It lit something up in him. In 1950, a 6-year-old Mick met another boy who would eventually change the course of his life, Keith Richards. They went to the same primary school in Dartford and were classmates for a while, until Mick's family moved to Wilmington in 1954 and they lost touch. But fate had other plans. While Mick was busy growing up, singing and studying, he also started jamming with a friend named Dick Taylor. They were into blues and rock and roll, covering legends like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Muddy Waters. Nothing serious, just a little garage band fun. Then, in October 1961, something incredible happened. Mick ran into Keith again at Dartford train station. Keith couldn't help but notice the records Mick was holding: Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry. That was all it took. The spark was back. Soon after, the two started hanging out again, geeking out over music. They teamed up with Taylor and began meeting regularly to play. They eventually started calling themselves the Blues Boys and added a few more friends into the mix. But the vibe wasn't just about fun anymore. Something bigger was forming. Mick, by then, had left school after acing his O-levels and A-levels. He was even enrolled at the London School of Economics, studying finance on a government grant. For a moment, Mick Jagger almost became an accountant or even a politician. He once said being a politician wasn't that different from being a pop star. He might have had a point. But the music pulled harder. Mick and Keith moved into a small flat in Chelsea with another guitar player, Brian Jones. Brian was already playing at the Ealing Club under the name Elmo Lewis, joining in with a band called Blues Incorporated. That club was the heartbeat of the British R&B scene at the time. And before long, Mick, Keith, and Brian were all performing together. The chemistry between them was electric. Mick's raw energy, Keith's guitar magic, and Brian's vision started to blend into something new. They began practicing on their own, away from the club, building something from scratch. Those sessions would soon lay the foundation for what would become one of the greatest rock bands in history, the Rolling Stones. And just like that, a boy who once sang into mirrors was on his way to becoming a legend. How the Rolling Stones was formed. The Rolling Stones are more than just a rock band, they're a full-blown music legend. Formed in London back in 1962, the group has been rocking stages and pushing boundaries for over 60 years. With a raw, bluesy sound that helped shape the very heart of rock and roll, the Stones didn't just ride the wave of music history, they helped create it. In the beginning, the band was made up of 5 young men with a shared love for American blues and rock: Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Brian Jones, Bill Wyman, and Charlie Watts. At first, it was Brian Jones who ran the show. He pulled the band together, gave them their name, found them gigs, and played a big part in shaping their early image and sound. But things began to shift in 1963 when a sharp young manager named Andrew Loog Oldham came on board. He saw star power in Mick and Keith and pushed them to start writing their own songs. That move changed everything. Jagger and Richards quickly became the creative engine of the group, pumping out songs that would soon top charts around the world. But as their influence grew, Brian Jones started to fade into the background. Struggling with drug addiction, he found it harder and harder to keep up, both musically and personally. In the early days, the Rolling Stones played gritty covers of blues and rock classics, but it wasn't long before they were leading the British invasion, the wave of UK bands that took America by storm in the 60s. Their sound was different. It was rough, rebellious, and full of attitude. And it hit home with a generation looking for something real. Then came the hits. I Can't Get No, Satisfaction, Get Off of My Cloud, and Paint It Black. These weren't just popular songs, they were anthems. Their 1966 album Aftermath was the first to feature all original songs and is still seen as one of their most important early records. The Stones weren't afraid to experiment either. In 1967, they dabbled in psychedelic rock with their Satanic Majesties. Request, but soon went back to their gritty blues roots with classics like Jumpin' Jack Flash and Honky Tonk Women. Albums like Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed cemented their reputation, with tracks like Sympathy for the Devil, Gimme Shelter, and You Can't Always Get What You Want becoming instant classics. But as the music soared, things behind the scenes got messy. By 1969, Brian Jones was out of the band. Just weeks after his exit, he tragically died, and the band had already brought in a new guitarist, Mick Taylor. That same year, the Stones were introduced on stage for the first time as the greatest rock and roll band in the world. And honestly, they were living up to the title. The 70s saw the release of Sticky Fingers, home to Brown Sugar, and that iconic Tongue and Lips logo. Then came Exile on Main Street, Goat's Head Soup, with the ballad Angie, and more chart toppers. After Taylor left, Ronnie Wood stepped in and became a permanent member by 1976. They just kept going. Some Girls in 1978 gave us the disco-influenced Miss You, while Tattoo You in 1981 brought the unforgettable Start Me Up. Even in the late 80s, when many bands faded, the Stones roared back with Steel Wheels, proving they were far from done. Their 1994 album Voodoo Lounge topped charts around the world, and their stadium tours became historic events. In fact, by 2007, they had smashed records for the highest-grossing tours ever. Not once, but 3 times. And even as the years rolled on, they stayed on top. In 2021, they were still the highest-earning live act. After bassist Bill Wyman left in 1993, the band continued with Daryl Jones on tour and in the studio. Following Charlie Watts' passing in 2021, Steve Jordan stepped in as their drummer. Yet through all the changes, the Stones never stopped. Their 2016 album Blue and Lonesome shot straight to #1 in the UK, proving their music still had power. With an estimated 200 million records sold, 3 Grammy Awards, and a place in both the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the UK Music Hall of Fame, the Rolling Stones have truly earned their place in music history. Magazines like Billboard and Rolling Stone have named them one of the greatest bands of all time, and it's easy to see why. From smoky blues bars to sold-out stadiums, the Rolling Stones have lived, played, and rocked through every era. And even after all these years, their story is still rolling. Mick Jagger's strained relationship with Keith Richards. Even though Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are the creative force behind the Rolling Stones, their relationship hasn't always been smooth. In fact, over time, things between them started to get a little tense. Sure, They've written some of the biggest rock songs in history together, but spending decades side by side, on stage, backstage, and in the studio can take its toll on anyone. People often describe their bond as a classic love-hate dynamic, and honestly, it fits. Being in a band isn't always about friendship. It's about surviving each other, especially in an industry that doesn't exactly make it easy to keep long-term relationships steady. Fans might picture them as brothers in arms when they're rocking out under the lights, but behind the scenes, it hasn't always been hugs and high fives. Still, there's no denying the magic they create when they're in sync. They earned the nickname the Glimmer Twins for a reason. Jagger brought the fire with his voice and swagger, while Richards gave the songs their heartbeat with his unforgettable riffs. Together, they defined the Stones' sound: raw, rebellious, and timeless. But being in a band for over 60 years means bumps in the road are inevitable. One of the biggest points of friction? Musical direction. Jagger has always had an ear for what's next, dabbling in disco, punk, and even pop when the moment felt right. Richards, on the other hand, preferred to stick with the band's gritty rock and roll roots. To him, chasing trends wasn't the way forward. It was a distraction. And while some of those risks paid off, like the punk-inspired Respectable from Some Girls, others, like the Dirty Work era, didn't exactly win over the whole band. Richards especially seemed checked out during that time, making it clear he wasn't interested in following the crowd just to stay relevant. Their disagreements went beyond just musical style. They didn't always see eye to eye on the value of their work. Richards has been known to write off entire chapters of their catalog, while Jagger hasn't hidden his lack of love for Exile on Main Street, an album many fans and critics consider their greatest. But even with all the clashes, there's something deeper between them that has kept the band going. Time may have worn down their friendship, but what remains is something closer than that. Their bond runs too deep to break. Something built not just on music, but on shared history, struggle, and survival. They may not laugh together like they once did, but they still stand side by side where it matters most: the music. And sometimes their emotions leak into the songs in unexpected ways. Take a track like All About You. It might sound like a heartbreak ballad, but there's an undercurrent that hints at the wear and tear of a creative partnership that's both exhausting and impossible to let go of. At the end of the day, Jagger and Richards don't need to be best friends. They've already proven that even with tension, disagreements, and long periods of silence, they can still create something powerful together. The friendship may come and go, but the music? That's forever. But Mick Jagger's musical relationship hasn't been the only one that has been strained over time. His love life is another ball game entirely. Jagger's messy love life. Mick Jagger isn't just a rock star, he's a living legend. For more than 60 years, he's been the frontman of the Rolling Stones, and while his music has rocked the world, his love life has also kept fans talking. With his smooth moves, famous lips, and wild energy, Jagger quickly became one of the most desired men in music. From models to actresses and even a ballerina, he's had a long list of relationships, some beautiful, some messy, and some heartbreaking. It all started in the early 1960s, before the Rolling Stones became famous. One of Jagger's first known girlfriends was Cleo Sylvester, one of the few black British actresses at the time. She wasn't just his girlfriend, she was also the first woman to record a song with the Stones. They did a version of To Know Him Is to Love Him together, which marked the beginning of Jagger's long history of mixing romance with music. From 1963 to 1966, Jagger dated Chrissy Shrimpton, a young model who happened to be the sister of supermodel Jean Shrimpton. Their relationship ended badly, and it's believed that a few Rolling Stones songs, like Yesterday's Papers, Under My Thumb, and 19th Nervous Breakdown, were inspired by their breakup. But perhaps the most famous romance of Jagger's early years was with singer and actress Marianne Faithfull. Discovered by the Stones' manager, Marianne rose to fame with her hit song As Tears Go By, which was written for her by Jagger and Keith Richards. In 1966, Marianne left her husband to be with Jagger, and the two quickly became one of the most talked-about couples of the decade. They were young, stylish, and seemed made for each other. But behind the scenes, their relationship was troubled. They dealt with drug problems, cheating, and heartbreak. Marianne even suffered a miscarriage. By 1970, their relationship was over. Still, many fans believe that one of the band's most emotional songs, Wild Horses, was written about their time together. Right after the breakup, Jagger had an affair with Marcia Hunt, a singer and actress. In 1970, she gave birth to his first child, Karis, who now works in the film industry. But the relationship didn't last long. They split up, and years later she took Jagger to court to prove he was the father. Marcia has said that the song Brown Sugar was about her, though some believe it was about another woman, Claudia Lanier, a singer Jagger briefly dated in 1969. While filming the movie Performance, Jagger also had a short fling with Anita Pallenberg, who was already dating Keith Richards. The affair caused tension in the band and became one of the many complicated moments in the Stones' history. Then came Bianca Perez Mora Macias. Jagger met the model and activist after a Stones concert in 1970, and they quickly became a couple. By 1971, they were married, and Bianca gave birth to their daughter Jade that same year. The media couldn't get enough of them. They were young, rich, and stylish, always photographed at parties, events, and glamorous places like Studio 54. But like many of Jagger's relationships, the good times didn't last. Bianca found out he was cheating on her with model Jerry Hall, and the marriage began to fall apart. They divorced in 1978, but the time they spent together made them one of the most unforgettable couples of the 70s. When Jagger started seeing Jerry Hall, she was already engaged to Brian Ferry, the lead singer of Roxy Music. That didn't stop her from leaving Ferry and building a life with Jagger. The two had a wild but long-lasting relationship. Hall helped Jagger stay away from drugs for a while, and although they still partied a lot, their bond grew stronger. They broke up for a short while in the early 80s, but soon got back together and had their first child, Elizabeth, in 1984. The next year, they had a son, James. In 1990, the couple had a wedding ceremony in Indonesia. They went on to have two more children, Georgia May and Gabriel, in the 90s. Georgia became a model like her mom, and Gabriel later became a journalist. Even though they had 4 kids together, Jagger continued to cheat. From 1991 to 1994, he had an affair with Carla Bruni, a model who would later become the First Lady of France. The final blow came in 1999 when Jerry Hall found out that Jagger was having another affair. This time with model Luciana Gimenez, who was pregnant with his 7th child, Lucas. As they prepared for a divorce, it was revealed that their wedding had never been legally recognized. Instead of divorcing, the couple ended their relationship with an annulment. It was an unusual ending for a relationship that had lasted more than 2 decades and produced 4 children. Still, Hall looked back on their time together without bitterness. She felt she had lived a full life and gained 4 beautiful children along the way. After Hall, Jagger continued to date younger women. In 2000, he had a short relationship with Sophie Dahl, a model and the granddaughter of writer Roald Dahl, but that didn't last either. In 2001, Jagger met fashion designer Loren Scott during a photo shoot. Tall, elegant, and creative, Scott was very different from the women Jagger had dated before. They became partners both in love and in work. She designed his stage outfits for the Stones' 50th anniversary tour and supported his career quietly from behind the scenes. They were together for over a decade, but in 2014, tragedy struck. Scott died by suicide at age 49. Her death shocked those close to her, and Jagger was devastated. He paid tribute to her by setting up a fashion scholarship in her name at Central St. Martin's University in London and performed a touching song in her honor at her memorial. Later in 2014, Jagger met Melanie Hamrick, a ballet dancer from the American Ballet Theatre. They had met backstage at a Stones concert in Japan while he was still with Scott. After Scott's passing, he and Hamrick became close, and in 2016, she gave birth to his 8th child, Devereaux. At the time, Jagger was already in his 70s, and many were surprised to see him become a father again. Hamrick, who is 44 years younger than Jagger, has stayed by his side ever since. In 2019, before retiring from ballet, she even choreographed a show using Rolling Stone songs, blending her world with his. Their relationship is quiet and private, and has lasted longer than many expected. Despite their age gap, they seem to have made things work. She has described their relationship as strong, and even mentioned that he's more supportive than many husbands she knows. And though Jagger once joked that being a dad again after so long felt strange and unfamiliar, he seems to have embraced fatherhood once more. Now in his 80s, Mick Jagger has lived through it all: fame, fortune, heartbreak, and everything in between. His love life has been filled with unforgettable women, headline-making breakups, secret affairs, and moments of real connection. Some relationships were short-lived. Others lasted for years. Some ended with love, others with pain. But each one became part of the story of a man who lived louder and loved wilder than most. Through it all, Jagger has never stopped being himself. And whether he's on stage in front of thousands or sharing quiet moments with his family, the one thing that's clear is this: Mick Jagger doesn't follow the rules, he writes his own. Jagger's strained relationship with Brian Jones. When most people think of the Rolling Stones, the first name that usually comes to mind is Mick Jagger. But back when the band first started in the early 1960s, it wasn't Jagger who was in charge. It was a young musician named Brian Jones. He was the one who formed the group, gave it its name, and guided its early sound. He was also the first true leader of what would become one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Brian Jones was talented, no doubt about that. He could play all kinds of instruments and had a good ear for music. But he also had a big ego. He liked being in control and wanted everyone to know the band was his creation. As the group grew more popular, though, things began to change. The spotlight started to shift, and it wasn't shifting toward him. The Rolling Stones were climbing the charts during a time when bands like the Beatles were ruling the world. To keep up, they brought in a new manager who had big ideas. He believed that writing their own songs would take them further than just playing covers. So Mick Jagger and Keith Richards teamed up and began writing the songs that would define the band. Their partnership would eventually become one of the most successful in music history. But that success came with tension. The more Jagger and Richards took control, the less important Jones became. He didn't take it well. He still wanted to be the leader, even as his role got smaller and smaller. Behind the scenes, it was clear he was struggling to adjust to the new dynamic. The band was evolving, but Jones didn't want to change with it. Things only got worse when he began using drugs heavily. His personal life started affecting the band. He was often late, missed rehearsals, and became difficult to work with. His drug problems also led to legal trouble, with multiple arrests that made it impossible for him to travel to the U.S. with the band on tour. He was becoming more of a liability than an asset. Jones also had strong opinions about the band's new direction, especially the way Jagger was acting and dressing. As the group embraced bolder fashion and a more modern image, Jones didn't like it. He had a more old-school view of how rock stars should look and behave. He didn't connect with the new style and felt left behind, both musically and personally. By mid-1969, the rest of the band had had enough. They decided it was time for Jones to go. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards visited him and told him the truth. The band would move forward without him. To save face, Jones told the public that he had chosen to leave because of creative differences. But everyone close to the situation knew he had been pushed out. Only a few weeks later, tragedy struck. On July 3, 1969, Brian Jones was found dead in the swimming pool at his home. He was just 27 years old. The cause of death was drowning, but his health had already been in a terrible state due to years of drug and alcohol use. His liver was damaged, and doctors found a dangerous mix of substances in his system. His death shocked the music world and left a cloud over the Rolling Stones just as they were entering their peak years. Jones's death also marked the beginning of a sad and eerie pattern in rock history. Soon after, other young stars like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Jim Morrison would also die at age 27. That's how the infamous 27 Club began, and Jones was its first member. It's hard not to wonder what could have happened if Jones had lived longer. Could he have cleaned up, turned things around, and maybe even rejoined the band he started? Would he have found peace outside the spotlight? Those questions will never be answered, but one thing is clear. Brian Jones helped create something bigger than himself. Even though his time with the Rolling Stones was cut short, his impact on music is still felt to this day. His death didn't just end a chapter for the band, it changed their story forever. After Jones passed, the band brought in a new guitarist, Mick Taylor, and began a powerful new phase in their career. But they never forgot where it all started. Jones may have had his flaws, but without him, there may never have been a Rolling Stones. Over 50 years later, fans still remember Brian Jones. He was young, talented, and full of fire. He burned bright but faded fast. His story is a mix of success and sadness, brilliance and chaos. And even though he's no longer here, his name lives on in rock history. Not just as the founder of the Rolling Stones, but as a reminder of how fast fame can rise and how quickly it can fall. The real reason Mick Jagger wasn't at Brian Jones' funeral. At around midnight on the night of the 2nd to 3rd July 1969, Jones was discovered motionless at the bottom of his swimming pool at Cochford Farm. His Swedish girlfriend, Anna Wolin, was convinced he was alive when he was taken out of the pool, insisting he still had a pulse. However, by the time the doctors arrived, it was too late, and he was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital at the age of 27. When news of his death was made public, fans were heartbroken. People all over the world mourned, and tributes poured in. But what happened next left many with questions, especially about the people closest to him. The Rolling Stones had a huge concert planned just 2 days later at Hyde Park in London. The show was supposed to introduce their new guitarist, Mick Taylor. But after Brian's death, the concert took on a new meaning. Instead of canceling, the band turned it into a tribute. Mick Jagger read a poem, butterflies were released into the air, and the crowd stood in silence. It was beautiful and sad all at once. But when it came time for Brian's funeral, something strange happened. Mick Jagger didn't go, nor did Keith Richards. Only two of the Stones showed up, drummer Charlie Watts and bassist Bill Wyman. Many fans were shocked. How could Jagger not be there to say goodbye to the man who started the band? The press went wild. Rumors flew. Some thought it was cold and heartless. Others wondered if something deeper was going on. The official reason? Jagger was flying to Australia with Marianne Faithfull to begin filming a movie. He said the timing couldn't be changed, that it was a contract he couldn't break. But to many, it felt like an excuse. After all, this wasn't just anyone. This was Brian, his former bandmate, his old friend. Some said Jagger had already emotionally checked out of the friendship. Their relationship had been messy for years. Brian was spiraling, and the band had pushed him out just weeks before his death. Things had been tense, and by the end, it seemed like there was no love lost. Still, skipping the funeral raised eyebrows. It fed the idea that Jagger had moved on quickly, leaving Brian in the past. Meanwhile, Brian was buried in his hometown of Cheltenham. His coffin was silver and bronze, sealed tightly, and placed 10 feet underground to stop anyone from digging it up. Only a few close friends and family members were there. Over the years, stories kept coming out. People began to question how Brian had really died. Was it an accident or something more? Some believed he was murdered. A builder working on his house that night was rumored to have fought with him over money. Rumors spread that the man had confessed to someone close to the band. But the police never reopened the case, saying there wasn't enough evidence to prove anything new. Even decades later, Brian's children still believe there's more to the story. They think their father didn't just drown, that someone might have been involved. Documentaries have been made, books have been written, and fans still argue about what really happened that night. But what hurt the most for many fans wasn't just Brian's sudden death. It was how quickly he seemed forgotten by the people who once stood beside him. The Rolling Stones kept making music, the world kept spinning, and Brian's story slowly faded until, every few years, someone brings it back to light. The truth is, without Brian, there might not have been a Rolling Stones. He gave them their name, their bluesy roots, and their original fire. But by the end of his life, he had become the outcast of the band he created. And when he died, only a few were there to see him off. It's one of the saddest chapters in rock history, not just because of how he died, but because of what came after. What did you think of Brian Stone? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.